that they're running a Windows binary on a Linux system. Yeah, eventually, hopefully, they would find an alternative within the free and open source software world. But in the meantime, I think it does free people to have the facility to run it. And I mean, I think I said to you before, I can count now on my left hand the amount of times I've actually ran Wine on my desktop now in the last year. It's very rare. If I regain my addiction to World of Warcraft, I'd probably give it another run and see where it was. But that was probably about it from the last major usage I had of it. I do keep it on my system, but probably I wouldn't need to. I wouldn't miss it if it went away, I think.
One of the issues, I think, is Blizzard still the main company behind the game, or Blizzard?
I wouldn't know.
I played all the first games they had way back in the days, in the 90s, but I didn't really play the third one onwards. I just tried them for
funny enough, actually, this is a nice way to do a little bit of a completeness for the show, because this goes back to Ubuntu 8.04, because I was obviously running Wine on that, and I was playing World of Warcraft on that very, very happily. I mean, I wrote a couple of articles. At the time, when I was just doing the transformation of coming from a dual booting system to a Linux machine, I had the facility to run World of Warcraft on both machines.
Yeah.
And I remarked at the time that the Linux version, or Linux running on Linux through Wine, was actually quicker than in Windows.
I saw Microsoft MVP claiming the same back in 2007. I think I could find the article, and he wasn't the only person to say so. And they don't even use Linux so much. He was going to Linux just to try it, and he said, "Oh, well, that's faster. I might as well play on Linux."
From memory, I think I was getting about 15 frames a second more. I believe when because I had my graphics settings relatively low. I didn't have a gaming PC, so I was having to scrimp and save on the graphic effects. But I mean, I was running it on an average setting, I would say, and I seem to remember it certainly was noticeably smooth and noticeably quicker. So I was really chuffed, and like I say, that was another reason why I was convinced to go to the 100% Linux.
It must have improved since then. I think that the gap in terms of performance between Windows and Linux is actually narrowing as time goes by, because the Linux drivers can only really improve to the point where you have very good utilization of the hardware, of all the stuff in the silicon, and the Microsoft drivers, they rely on the advances in the hardware side of things, because they already kind of utilize as much as they can. The companies have to target Windows first, because most people will use that. But one of the things that I just wanted to say very quickly, though, is Blizzard was I'm pretty sure it was Blizzard. I think in the past they had two companies behind the game. That's the reason I brought this up, and I played it in the 90s. That first, I think it was two companies behind it. The Blizzard was explaining that the reason they didn't do a Linux native port was lots of people were using it on Wine, and they used it pretty happily. Now, I don't really know if Blizzard was trying to make it work better on Wine and maybe testing for compatibility, but their reason for not providing something that would just run natively on Linux, which would have all sorts of advantages, was that Wine had already kind of reduced the incentive for them to do so. And this is, and the same goes for, we were talking about crossover Office. Lots of people will say, well, we can run Office on Linux, and this is what we used to run on Windows, and they never even try to use, to test OpenOffice or to go to the online versions of Office suites and something. So they just go straight into what they already know, and they try to make the Linux box work so they still work on Windows. So it's kind of an iffy thing.
I do remember now one of the other features that it had when running on Linux through Wine, and that was what I couldn't do in Windows was have my World of Warcraft in a separate, had it in a window on the desktop instead of maximised full screen. I had it in this little window, and I'd be doing something else, like I'd be in the IRC chat room, and that wasn't possible in XP without it grinding to a halt. Whereas in Linux, I was getting a reasonable frame rate. I mean, nothing major. I think it was about 24 frames a second, but I was still functional and have my desktop visible as well to do all the other little bits and pieces while I was.
Or you could put it on one side of the cube.
Sorry?
You could put it on one side of the cube as well.
Well, that just impressed me, no end. And like I said, that was another one of the reasons why I thought, well, this has got to be the system that I'm going to be using, because it did everything I wanted to do, and it was it performed blisteringly fast. Right. Well, we're coming up to the end of the show time now for our supplemental, unless you have any extra topics you want to throw in before I do the roundup.
Well, I was just going to say something very fast. I was thinking about the window manager situation. You were talking about the fact that it was running pretty well with Linux, even if you resize the window and actually put it among some other windows. And one of the things that I found is, you know how lots of people will say that the graphics effects are a complete waste of time, complete waste of GPU energy and things like that. What I actually found is when I disabled my visual effects in Kwin, all the rendering of the windows is a lot slower, is a lot worse, and when I move things around, especially over SSH, they have to be redrawn. And I don't really know all the processes and how the window manager is actually trying to manage things around the desktop, but maybe even texturizes a few of the windows. But everything works really, really nicely when you have the acceleration with the 3D and everything enabled, in the sense that you can drag windows around, you can type things into windows, and it's actually more responsive. The characters appear on the screen more quickly if I have the 3D enabled. I'm not sure exactly if something has changed since then. But one thing I do know in the latest KDEs, in the latest KDE versions, is you mentioned Emerald before, and for those who don't know, Emerald adds all kinds of really nice translucencies around windows, and it kind of emulates, I think it has the ability now to emulate the, what Microsoft calls the, what do they call it, the
Aero glass?
Yeah, I think it can do that. Now with KDE, they get the same sort of, people don't really realize that out of the box, KDE is really quite crude, and it's trying to be very generous and very actually being very soft on the hardware, so they don't really want you to think it's a piece of bloat. But if you go to the options now, what you could do is make the titles translucent, you can make inactive windows translucent, and you can choose the level to which you do that. So you could achieve the same type of thing in KDE now as you do with Emerald. Lots of people don't know that, and they don't actually customize their desktops to do that. And because it requires you to have the GPU all set up, and sometimes even with binary drivers, I don't think any of the distros actually have it set up so that it works this way out of the box. So even if you find one of those fancy distros that try to kind of give you a very slick interface, they probably will not have the 3D enabled because it's too risky. Because if you boot and you don't have the graphical drivers working very well, you probably will struggle to even get started. So, but no, there is lots to see in the latest KDE, and I hear 4.6, which I haven't tried yet, it's really polished. So lots of people who don't find GNOME 3 or Unity to be quite so satisfactory, or maybe they have second feelings about it, might want to try KDE, especially now, because KDE 4 is really mature now.
Well, I think today we're not having any music. It's going to be a case of you just got our voices to listen to. So I'd like to first of all thank you for downloading this extra podcast and audio cast, and I hope you've enjoyed it. And just at the very end, I want to reference some feedback that we received already on episode 36. Now, I think anybody who listened to episode 36 would remember the long chat we had about Windows, the trolls that frequent people's websites, and the problems that some of us have had in the past with these types of people. And really, over the last day, I've probably seen the best example that I can give to you now. I personally thought I'd seen everything. I've seen some outrageous lies written about myself. I've seen some outrageous lies written about Roy. And I thought I'd seen everything until the feedback for the last show, where we have one person in a news group who's trying to claim that on the last episode, and the bizarre thing about this is anybody can disprove this by listening to episode 38, and I would strongly recommend, if you haven't listened to episode 38, go back and have a listen and see if you can find what this person's referring to. But they make a claim accusing me of admitting to creating erroneous Microsoft account names, with some sort of fiendish plan in mind, I suppose. And it's a complete lie. I did nothing to provoke this. We were talking on the show actually about some of the accounts that get created which post will have a pro-Microsoft opinion, about some of the ones that I've exposed in the past. But this person decided to try and claim that I'd admitted on the show that I'd created these things myself. You'll have to listen to it for yourself, and you can make your own judgment. But I think certainly over the last couple of weeks, I've certainly seen an increase in people being more critical of the show and highlighting points that they were claiming that we'd said, which we didn't.